From Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 3 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
Welcome to the McLaughlin Group, a show where friends disagree agreeably. I'm Tom Rogan. This week we'll debate the surging Bernie Sanders and Super Tuesday, sanctuary cities, economic jitters over coronavirus, and more. Our panelists today are author and columnist Pat Buchanan, Eleanor Clift of the Daily Beast, Clarence Page of the Chicago Tribune, and the author and national security expert John Schindler. Okay, let's get to issue 1. Coronavirus on Wall Street.
I told my wife, I want 2 months. I want all the drugs that we have. I need 2 months supply.
CNBC financial analyst Jim Cramer spoke for many investors this week. With rising fears that the coronavirus epidemic is turning into a global pandemic, Wall Street suffered massive losses. Investors fear that the spreading coronavirus will disrupt global supply chains and U.S. consumer spending. And so a selling spree has seen more than $1 trillion in paper value wiped off the markets, which have fallen around 10% from record highs earlier this month. Pat, where are we heading with this, do you think? And how would you rate President Trump's response as articulated at the podium in the White House press room this week?
Right now, we've got 60 Americans who have been infected with the virus. None of them has died, so it's not a huge medical crisis in the United States. It is an economic crisis. You've got more than 10% of the stock market's been wiped out, trillions of dollars lost. Lots of billionaires and millionaires aren't billionaires and millionaires anymore. And I think it presents an historic opportunity for Trump to lead in a crisis daily, take that podium, use his bully pulpit. He hasn't really done it yet, I admit that, but we are in a political crisis. This is something unlike, for example, global warming, which isn't acute this year. This is acute today. Everyone is talking about it, Tom, and I think it could really affect the election in November, but I don't know of anybody who thinks Bernie Sanders is the guy to handle it.
Eleanor.
Well, if you're going to get political right away, I'd say there's a big opening there for Mike Bloomberg, who did handle health crises in New York City, and Joe Biden, who handled them from the White House. So if we're talking politics. And this president doesn't have any credibility. He denies global warming. His approach to this in the beginning has been to deny it, saying it'll be gone in April, it's no big deal. And that's seen in the press room the other day with everybody praising him for his leadership. And he's basically disagreeing with the health officials behind him. He's minimizing it because he sees it affecting his reelection. And would he have gotten this involved if the stock market hadn't tanked? But look, I want him to succeed. I want Tony Fauci to succeed. I want everybody to keep this under control. But the health officials are telling us that there's a high likelihood that this is going to metastasize, and we have 1 million hospital beds in the country, which is not very many when you think of how many people could be affected with this. It doesn't appear to be deadly for everyone, but there's a lot that's unknowable about this, and this president came into office and he dismantled all of the response that President Obama had put in place, saying, I don't want thousands of people sitting around with nothing to do. We can just bring them back anytime. Well, Mr. President, now's the time to bring them back.
Okay, John, how do you see it? And also, how do you judge the situation with China, which now says the cases are going down? Should we believe that?
No, but I think we're also in a very odd situation where no one really knows, even the medical experts, what's going on here, since a large percentage of people who have the coronavirus in China and elsewhere are asymptomatic or have essentially a cold, yet others are having multiple organ failure. So we're very early here. I do think Pat is right. There's a tremendous opportunity for the administration here, which they seem not to be taking. And this is a make or break moment. The Trump administration has gotten by on bluster, frankly, for pushing 4 years now. And this is not something that can be blustered to create a neologism. This has to show real action. That said, there is still time, another week or two, depending on how the stock market goes, for the Trump administration to show a seriousness here, which they frankly have not. And if they miss this opportunity, Pat's right, there's a big opportunity here. If they miss this, this could be catastrophic for them come November.
Well, it was sadly telling that President Trump's efforts to try to calm fears and calm the markets didn't have that effect at all, had just the opposite effect. The markets continued to go down. I think they even accelerated the first day or so right after his speech, which really wasn't much of a speech. I mean, it just, as usual, bounced from one topic to another, mostly got right back to the campaign again, as if that's going to hold back the virus. And this, you're right, John, I mean, he's been able to sort of BS his way through most issues. Can I say that?
You're allowed to say it.
Thank you.
I
Good,
think you're
good.
allowed to say it.
I don't know what's censored and what isn't anymore, but the fact is he's always been a great salesman. Just get in there and make that sale even when he doesn't know really what he's talking about.
But you know,
Lincoln
said they have a right to criticize who have a heart to help. I mean, what Nancy Pelosi's been saying and Schumer's been saying is abject low politics. It's approaching, it looks like, something of a national crisis. It's not a medical crisis yet, economic crisis, political crisis yet, but the Democratic Party and those attacking Trump are going to be judged on this as well by the American people who want action, leadership, strength, want to know what to do, what's to be done.
I think the Democrats quadrupled the amount of money that the president asked for, and they're going to get that done. So I think they're pushing for action. And I think you're politicizing this far more than the Democrats are or that the American people are. The American people are looking to their government, and they want to know that somebody's in charge, because, you know, if panic sets off, you know, we could have a situation where the panic is worse than what we're facing, and I think that's the shortage of masks. You're going to see runs on medicines. We're not ready to close the banks yet, but maybe we're going to have to close the pharmacies so people can get the medicine they need.
Yeah, look, I think, you know, as they say in the Navy, you know, the captain of the ship is responsible, and Trump is ultimately on the hook for this. That said, the Democrats do have to be careful here, because, look, Trump is not actually responsible for the coronavirus problem. His cuts to public health are scandalous, don't get me wrong, but they can get in a very dangerous space with this too, because the public does want action, not a blame game. Trump is blaming people because that's what he does.
To Eleanor's point, the Democrats have appropriated.
They're trying. And this is, if they can stick on that,
and there's a
they will win.
Frankly, both Pelosi and McCarthy, the Republican and Democrat leaders of the House, have both tried to stay out of politics and say bipartisan, bicameral, and that's the way they've been moving. It's President Trump who politicized it right away with his statement from the podium.
What you heard from Jim Cramer is really an important point, I think. I read in the Washington Post had an outstanding piece. It is the fact that the Chinese have the ingredients and the final product for something like 20 crucial medicines and drugs upon which Americans depend basically to stay alive. You saw Kramer saying, told his wife to go out and buy them right now. That's the type of reaction you're going to get. The Olympics, what may be shut down. I'm telling you, if this keeps up for weeks or months, I would be surprised if the Milwaukee Convention and the Charlotte Convention were not affected.
We're not in July yet, and the president actually, there's some truth to the fact that if the weather gets warmer, the virus may diminish. So I'm not going to call off the conventions yet, but there is a whistleblower who has come forward and pointing out that when the president was sort of bragging about bringing the people home from Japan, they sent health workers out without any protective gear. And those people are contagious, and the whistleblower came forward, and the HHS secretary basically reassigned her job and said, if you speak out about this, you're going to be fired. And the messaging that the vice president is now overseeing includes having Dr. Fauci, you know, speak from the White House. You know, you have to put the health officials forward. They're the ones that the American people are going to be looking to.
Concluding comment.
Concluding comment. The debate that has to happen when the dust settles with this is a bipartisan one about the wisdom of allowing so much of our public health infrastructure and pharmaceuticals and everything else be totally single source dependent on China. We're in a very, very bad situation if this becomes a months-long crisis, and that debate has to happen.
Okay. My final takeaway here, we're just lucky it's not a bioweapon. Look at what the Russians had a piece on this, some of the research. Super plagues and splicing and dicing genetics. Very dangerous stuff. Anyway.
Well, thanks for that, Tom. I'm going to sleep really well tonight.
Okay, good stuff. Issue 2, Super Sanders.
I'm hearing my name mentioned a little bit tonight. Bernie.
If Democratic presidential hopefuls believe they could undermine frontrunner Bernie Sanders, well, they must be disappointed. Debating this week before Saturday's South Carolina primary, Sanders faced attacks from across the stage. But the polls suggest he's come out unscathed. While Joe Biden seems to have retained his lead in South Carolina, Sanders shows leads in most of the 14 states holding primaries this coming Super Tuesday. Eleanor, what happens if Bernie Sanders wins, say, 12 of the 14 states on Super Tuesday? Is that it? Is that it for Biden?
Call the rectory.
Yeah.
I'm not up to Super Tuesday yet.
Okay.
I'm looking at South Carolina,
Okay.
and I'm anticipating a win by Joe Biden, and Joe Biden gets to fight another day. Much of the Democratic Party is uneasy about Bernie Sanders, and if you add his vote totals, he looks like a 35 or 40% candidate, which means there's 55 or 60% against him. The party has to winnow down, and I imagine some of the candidates will be gone. I think we're looking at the 3 Bs, Bernie, Biden, and Bloomberg, and I think Bloomberg is the unknown quantity. I mean, we said in the earlier segment that he has an opening to display his mayoral competence in the wake of a crisis. But we don't know whether his ads, and they're terrific ads, whether they are going to turn into votes. So if Biden emerges, we could have a fight between Biden and Bloomberg. I think that's what we're looking at.
I think Eleanor's basically right here. Biden has got to win South Carolina and win it big and get some momentum going in to carry some of those states on Super Tuesday. You wonder if he will. We are going to find out about Bloomberg, what you get for $500 million and 2 lousy debate performances. But you mean when you talk about the 60%?
He was better in the
hold
second
it, hold
debate.
it, Eleanor.
That's right.
When you talk about if Bernie gets 35 or 40%, are those two going to get 60%? I think a lot of these candidates like Amy and Pete and Steyer may not reach the 15% threshold. I think it's by Wednesday we're going to know if Bernie Sanders has a prohibitive lead that really cannot be stopped.
Clarence, one of the things here that we talk about the sort of the vote share and how the Democratic Party might coalesce around someone who's not Bernie, and yet the same was said in 2016 about Trump, was it not?
Oh yeah,
and look who's the president.
There are a lot of parallels to 2016. One thing, though, a lot of Republicans regret, especially the never Trumpers, regret not being more critical of Trump early on, because back when he was more vulnerable. That's not the complaint now. I think people certainly have piled onto Bernie. I'm wondering, people talk about regions. We've heard from a Midwestern state, we've heard from a couple of Eastern states, and one for the South coming up. But the thing is, the big states we haven't heard from: Texas, California. These large states, I have my doubts that Bernie can carry those states. He'll pick up some delegates.
Who does?
But we will see.
Who carries those 2 states that Bernie doesn't?
Well, yeah, that's the question.
Biden and Bloomberg are in contention.
Yeah,
okay.
A moderate, I think. Bloomberg and Biden.
All right, let's bring in John.
Look, South Carolina, if Biden wins by more than 10 points, Joe-mentum is a real thing, and it's here, and it might well carry over on come Tuesday, on Super Tuesday. But Pat's right. By Wednesday morning, we'll have a clear sense of whether an actual non-Democrat could get the Democratic nomination.
John, and to follow up on that, what do you think happens if Bernie Sanders is in that position? Do you think Michael Bloomberg runs as an independent? Do you think full panic?
Bloomberg ought to start targeting his ads against Bernie Sanders and not Donald Trump, which he hasn't done so far.
Elizabeth
So
Warren.
that could happen over the next couple of days.
You get Bloomberg runs and starts savaging Bernie. That rarely helps the guy doing the savaging, who is Bloomberg, who wants the support. Look, if Bernie, you mentioned 12 out of 14 states, he is gone. He's in the end zone. If you do that, what happens then is, I think the Democratic Party is going to have to adjust itself. If Bernie is on the verge of winning that nomination, they're just going to have to reconcile themselves to it, or they're going to take the party down to the
We're not there yet. We're not there yet. The Democrats have to do a lot of coalescing. Tom Steyer, for example, he's running in one state. His wife moves to South Carolina. He's got, in the latest polls, 15 or 19% of the vote. That's coming directly out of Joe Biden. What is he doing with that? He wants to advance climate change. Biden has called him out on how he's made his money on oil and gas and on private prisons. He ought to get out. He ought to endorse Biden. He ought to give his money to a super PAC. Biden doesn't have any money.
He also, Steyer, I have to say, has the most annoying voice in the world.
It doesn't work for me.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Anyway, on that incredibly important political observation.
The thing to watch here is Bernie in Nevada did astonishingly well among Hispanics. Got 53% of the Hispanic vote, a massive change from 2016 when he had the whitest campaign anyone's ever seen in the recent Democratic Party. We know that Biden is all in with the African American vote in the Deep South, but what happens in places like California and Texas, which have a ton of delegates
Bernie is leading,
and a lot of Hispanic voters? Right. If Bernie can keep up those numbers from Nevada with Hispanics, this could be a big problem for the Democratic Party.
Turnout is always a big thing, especially with the Hispanic vote. But really,
he got them out
all around. Look at how, he did, and that was impressive. So there has to be counter campaigning to deal with that.
Look, we are there. Texas is Tuesday. California is Tuesday. Bernie's in Massachusetts. Bernie's going to Minnesota after Amy. He's going after Warren in Massachusetts.
Late deciders decide elections.
This could be academic, this discussion.
Pat is feeling the burn, clearly. But, Democrats award delegates proportionately. So if Bloomberg, Biden are competitive, we've got a fight going.
Absolutely.
So let's wrap up this issue then with a kind of prediction about what will happen on Super Tuesday. I know we do have South Carolina on Saturday, so that as well. Pat?
My guess is that Saturday is Biden's going to win big.
Yep.
He's going to get some momentum. I don't know if it's going to be enough for him to pick up states or to win states. I think Bloomberg is not going to do as well as we thought he was because of his horrible debates. I think you mentioned 12 out of 14. That's a little high for me, even for me, but I think Bernie's going to run to daylight.
Eleanor?
Super Tuesday started out as a regional primary of southern states. I think Biden's going to do better than expected. He's very much still in the game.
John?
I'm sort of between both Pat and Eleanor. I think Biden will, Joe Manchin will show up in South Carolina. Whether that's enough for Tuesday, I have my doubts. I think Bernie's ground game in places like California and Texas might be better than the Democrats want to think it is.
And do you think Bernie Sanders can win the general election?
No.
You think Trump will win handily?
Yes.
Even though the polls show Sanders quite competitive at the moment?
I think he is. And I think in a very perverse way, right now, Sanders could be a very potent threat to Trump, depending how coronavirus and the stock market do. I still think Trump.
Let's go to Clarence and I'll come back to you, Pat.
No, dare I say the polls show that Donald Trump didn't have a chance for 4 years.
Correct.
Exactly.
That's a very good point.
I just want to say on Joe Biden, if he doesn't score well in South Carolina, he's out. That's going to change the landscape too.
This coronavirus and the economic impact already, the wipeout of a year's worth of growth in the stock market, trillions of dollars going to have an effect on the economy. Those two things, I don't know if the coronavirus is going to continue to November, but there's certainly the economic impact could be some kind of recession worldwide, and that would.
Very quickly, Eleanor. You want to add?
I said about Steyer's, I was critical earlier. He did make a point on the debate stage that this is about more than the presidency. It's about 42 members of the House who turned red seats blue, and it's about the Senate. And I think the arguments against Bernie are finally being made and are finally getting some traction.
Okay. Down
4 days.
Down ticket stuff also matters. Okay, issue 3, bye-bye money. 7 states and New York City suffered a blow this week when a federal appeals court ruled that the Trump administration can withhold federal funds from so-called sanctuary city authorities. Those authorities refused to cooperate with federal immigration enforcement efforts. The unanimous appeals court ruling by 3 judges overturns a lower court ruling which had prevented the Trump administration from withholding $250 million a year to aid state and local policing efforts. Clarence, will sanctuary cities and sanctuary authorities have to back down here?
I don't think so, not immediately. You're going to see some fights here. This is kind of like the marijuana issue when various states legalized it. The feds still hold marijuana illegal, but what's happened to that business? And there are good reasons why these so-called sanctuary city rules are in place, because police don't want to alienate the communities that they've got to serve and protect. And people, if they're afraid of police officers possibly turning them in or cooperating with ICE, then they're not going to get that cooperation.
Yeah, 2 or 3 appellate courts disagreed. So this is an outlier ruling, which means it's probably headed to the Supreme Court. And the president regards the Supreme Court as his court, but there is some precedent that argues against the sanctuary cities being forced to bow to the federal government. So I think legal decisions ahead. And the mayors in these cities and the governors in California and New York, they're not buckling in.
I think, look, the federal government's responsible for immigration. If somebody commits a crime, a rape or something like that in a sanctuary city, and they let him go and continue to do this, I think Trump is exactly right to cut off the funds for law enforcement there. The country is going to back him up, and I'll tell you what's going to happen. This coronavirus, illegal aliens coming into the country, border jumpers and all that, they're not going to be terribly popular if this thing starts spreading.
Oh, now we're blaming
You're gonna-
immigrants? Oh, my.
Eleanor, you are
it's a
gonna-
caravan
The same,
coming,
same
right?
thing happened during
All right.
same thing happened
John,
during the Ebola
this is-
crisis here.
This, what Democrats don't get is this is a winning issue for Trump and the Republicans in the bigger atmospherics. And anytime we're talking about immigration, particularly illegal immigration, is good for Trump in election years. What Democrats need to understand, whether he's right on the facts here or not, this is his special sauce.
Democrats are an urban party,
this is
first
safe
of all,
space for women.
and we're talking about law enforcement here. It is true. The big problem in our big cities is having community cooperation, and you've got to have it in order to get victims and witnesses to come forth and testify.
What do you say to that, Pat?
Well, I mean to that argument.
Yeah.
Look, I understand why those folks make it, but why can't they take people who are not basically folks that are really cooperating with them and give the criminals up? Sanctuary City says we're just not cooperating
giving
with
criminals
the
up.
feds.
Well,
that's
by
greatly
law-
exaggerated, really.
Yes,
But
exactly.
They are
It
still
won
giving
in
criminals
court,
up.
Clarence.
One at a time, one at a time.
They won in one court. They lost
Yeah.
in several others.
We got the big court. We're looking good there.
All right,
Unfortunately, you're right.
Eleanor, one of the challenges, though, would be that Democrats have talked a lot about the rule of law recently in terms of President Trump and in the impeachment battle, Ukraine, whatever, that in this case, Democrats seem to quite obviously be standing against the supreme law of the land, no?
No. They want them to share data with the federal government so the federal government can use that data to go hunt people down. And that's not how you run a city where people are hardworking and minding their own
Isn't that
business.
what ISIS is
Wait,
for?
yeah.
It may be what ICE is for, but they have other things to do to go after people who are really creating problems and not going after law-abiding
but federal law is
citizens
federal law,
and waiting
or
outside of schools
Okay,
or
John,
hospitals
ISIS
to go
had a lot
after
of
people.
abuses, and that's
Right.
why
No
the
argument, but all law
communities
enforcement
hate
has.
them.
All right.
And, well, when you got abuses, you correct it. That's what reform is supposed to be about.
John,
It's a process.
The
for this.
issue here is, to get back to Pat's point, does the federal government enforce immigration law or not? We can debate how harshly they should do
Well,
it,
let's
but are
debate
they or
the law.
not?
Let's debate the law and the procedures that they use out in the communities. That's what the problem is.
Executive is going to prevail here. It's prevailed in the appellate court. They're going to carry out these actions. It's going to go to the Supreme Court, and 5 guys are going to say Trump is right.
Clarence.
Well, that's your prediction for the day. But,
go for it.
Yeah. The fact is, this has been debated, as you well know, throughout the history of our country. And I cannot believe that issue, so-called sanctuary cities, is settled by any means. It's still very much alive.
And Trump tried to pan gold in 2018 by scaring people about immigrants, and it backfired. So I still trust the American people to make the right
They made
decisions
the
on
right
these
decision in
issues.
2016.
Well, 2018 is more recent than
All right,
2016,
John.
and I can count.
Let's look forward to 2021, okay? Whatever happens, whoever wins the presidency,
Right.
do you think there is a new prospect there of comprehensive immigration reform? We did see President Trump hint that the Dreamers issue would be an angle for him to potentially yield on some other point.
I think he would yield. If he's reelected, I think there's a real possibility of finally getting comprehensive immigration reform. And everyone knows in broad outline what that is going to look like. This is the one part that's not a mystery at all. It's just actually getting there. Of course, the Dreamers are going to be grandfathered in. Everyone knows this, no matter what Republicans may say. But the quid pro quo for that is going to have to actually be serious enforcement of immigration law. So if everyone can compromise, there's a way ahead.
I'd like to see comprehensive immigration reform. Everybody would. Why don't we have it? Because we cannot get together
Because
and
no
really
one wants
talk
to
about it.
compromise.
Actually,
Well, let you
Not
conclude.
since the 80s,
actually,
you know?
President Obama was called the deporter-in-chief because he was tough on immigration
What did
rights,
that get him?
and he got a bill out of the Senate with 68 votes, bipartisan. The House wouldn't bring it up. Paul Ryan wouldn't
Okay.
bring it up because the Tea Party or the Freedom Caucus was opposed. Freedom Caucus will never let this happen.
All right,
This takes
conclusion.
me right into my prediction.
Perfect.
Open borders is dead in Europe. It's going to be dead in the United States. You're going to see nationalism rising, transnationalism receding with its virus. Already you got folks like in Italy, don't come from Italy here. All over the world, you already see it happening. Japanese are being somewhat isolated. China's being totally isolated. All these powerful movements that have been up against transnationalism are going to begin to prevail. It's obvious.
All right,
That's
Eleanor.
a prediction you've given many times. That's Fortress America. You have young people, the millennials, the Z,
ZX, I
Z,
don't know.
whatever.
Yeah.
They see a very different world and a very different America.
Well, no, but there is a larger.
What's your
point.
prediction, though, Eleanor?
My
We're on
prediction is that after Super Tuesday, if Michael Bloomberg does not do as well as expected, there's going to be a lot of pressure on him to get out and put his money directly behind Joe Biden.
Okay, prediction.
To riff on Pat and Eleanor, there is a populist moment now throughout the developed world. On the right, it is on issues of identity and borders and immigration. On the left, it's on economic justice and fairness.
Prediction, though, prediction.
The right usually wins in the populist.
Okay, all right.
And the immigration issue is nowhere near being settled. I think we're going to see this continue, including the open borders argument. We don't have open borders now, but this is kind of like President Trump saying, we're building the wall right now. They're repairing parts that were already built. This is all a charade. My prediction, I'm going to reverse my previous mockery of a brokered convention and say I think there will be one now.
Okay, very good. Thank you for being.
Ask me again next week.
All right, thank you for being so quick on that, Clarence. I predict that there will be some big news coming this weekend. Look at Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's statement earlier in the week about something that might happen this weekend. Anyway, thank you for watching. Remember, the discussion continues at McLaughlin.com, and don't forget to check out our podcasts wherever you listen to audio.